This is your riverbank catfishing guide. All the tips, techniques, and baits you need to catch more catfish right now. Let's go. Okay, let's start off with where to find catfish in rivers. First and foremost, deep holes are often found in river bends where the current tends to erode the riverbed over time. These are generally great daytime hiding spots for catfish. And a really great tip is to look for the telltale sign of deeper pockets where the water appears darker and a bit slower moving there. Obviously, catfish prefer these areas because they swirl food and bait fish around with stronger current, and they offer them protection from any predators that may be after them. Next is structure, of course. Fallen trees, submerged logs and timber, and large rock piles are also tremendous hiding and ambush spots for catfish. So just look for any visible or submerged structure spots all along the riverbank because these spots are going to attract bait fish and smaller fish. And you know those are the optimal prey for catfish to inhale. Another great area to be on the lookout for are any current breaks where the flow of the water begins to slow down, like around large boulders and rocks or around any inside bends in the river. These are also prime points where debris frequently accumulates and where the surface water is a bit calmer. Catfish will tend to congregate in these areas not only to conserve energy and swimming fatigue, but of course to ambush prey there too. And last but not least is any area of river confluences, which is where smaller streams or creeks flow into the main river channel and sweep in lots of different foods and nutrients. These are pretty easy to spot when you see the joining of two bodies of water, which many times will have a change in color and a differing water flow too. Okay, now on to what we're going to use to catch catfish in your river. Live bait is always going to be our number one choice when fishing rivers because it very closely resembles the natural prey and diet of the catfish who live in there. Of course, using live, large, juicy night crawlers and minnows, shad, crawfish, and mussels are going to be our top choices 7 days a week. Now, cut bait, of course, works really great too, which is just cut up pieces of shad or bluegill or the bait fish that live in there like you see on the screen, if it's legal to do that in your area. The natural oils and scent and fish insides are able to attract catfish from a distance, especially with moving water in the river. And stink baits like this, prepared baits, also work really well in rivers. Stink baits and the various dough, dip, and paste baits are engineered to release very strong odors that bring catfish in from a distance. And we also love chicken liver or beef liver fishing in rivers because of its strong odor and texture as well. But it will shred apart pretty easily on the rocks and jaggedy edges. So, just like you see there, we put it together in pantyhose if it's legal to use where you live. And it stays together really well, and the blood and stink come through the nylon very easily and effectively. But you might just have to rebait every 15 to 20 minutes if you've got a stronger flowing current for any of the baits that we just talked about. That way, you always have the best bait in the water at all times to catch catfish. All right, now let's cover the best techniques to catch them. Just like in lakes and ponds, we want to cast all the above baits that we just talked about into the deepest holes in the river and around all the structure and cover we mentioned a little bit ago too. Just let the baits sit on the bottom. That's where the biggest catfish are always going to be. Catfish will move around to find food, but they are mostly bottom feeders and scavengers. You can also try drift fishing in your river, either on the bottom or preferably just off the bottom with a peg float and a Santee Cooper rig so that any sharp objects on the riverbed don't tangle you up. Now, let's gear up with what we need to catch catfish in rivers. Like with catfishing anywhere, we need to be using a big, strong fiberglass catfish rod like you see here, with a heavy action backbone that's able to absorb the fight when you do land a monster. We would recommend an 8 to 9 foot rod, which not only makes it easier to cast baits out farther to the deepest holes, but a more heavy and robust rod is going to give you the balance and the strength you need to handle big runs and tugs from the big boys like flatheads and blues. So now in terms of fishing line, we never go catfishing without at least using a strong 30-pound braid. And we use 50-pound braid for larger flathead and blue catfish and for fighting snapping turtles who also live on the bottom. Braided line, even at this weight, is super sensitive yet very, very strong. You will feel every hit and movement that the catfish makes in the water, and you're going to be able to control the fish much better in a stronger flowing current in rivers. And we strongly feel that braid is much better than fluoro or mono or anything else you could be using because there's simply no stretch with braided line. We always use a 4/0 or 5/0 blood red octopus circle hook when catfishing, and that is because the circle hook turns into the side of the catfish's mouth as opposed to gut hooking him, which makes the catch and release process much easier if that's what you like to do like we do. Now, if you're going for the bigger flatheads and blues, a 7/0 or 8/0 circle hook might be a little better. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the best and most popular rigs for river catfishing. First, and the simplest and most prevalent, is the slip sinker rig. Using a 1 to 2 ounce sinker should be sufficient to get it onto the bottom, but of course you may need to go a little heavier depending on the water depth you're fishing and the strength of the current that might be flowing. The good thing about the slip sinker is that it allows the catfish to take and run with the bait without necessarily feeling the weight of the sinker, which will always increase your chances of a solid and gentle hook set when he does take the bait and strike and begin to run. Okay, now is a good time to go through a quick tutorial on how we're going to put all these steps that we've talked about into play to catch the biggest catfish that you've ever caught. First is to locate the right spot. Like we talked about earlier, deeper holes, river bends, and areas of heavy structure are what you want to target. Fish where the fish are, and you will give yourself a much better chance of actually catching fish every time. Simple, easy, but extremely effective and powerful. You also have to make sure you've got a very strong uni knot tied on your circle hook or your leader so that you never lose a catfish ever. And you never get snagged or broken off in any debris or rocks within the river structure. We cannot emphasize enough how important being a knot tying pro is in catfishing, especially when you're fishing in rivers. Now, you also need to be a very precise caster too, because putting the bait within a few inches of exactly where you intend the bait to go is, of course, going to increase your chances of catching more fish. This will also increase your chances of getting onto the fish every time and thus waste any needless time having to always reposition your baits when it doesn't go where you intended it to be. And when you do think you've got a fish about to be on, wait just a little bit to gently set the hook and turn the circle hook into his mouth when you do feel a tug or a pull on the bait. Be just a little patient initially, as catfish will tend to play with their food a bit. So just make sure he has committed to biting before you pull the hook right out of his mouth. And when you begin to reel in your prize catch, make sure you've always got steady pressure and tension all the way you're reeling in. You never want to have any slack in the line during your retrieve. Of course, you always have to have your landing net nearby too, so you never needlessly lose a big catfish senselessly. Steady pressure at all times while reeling in will ensure that she won't escape or wiggle off. Having your net handy and a pair of pliers or hook remover is also important, especially when you're dealing with really large and sharp octopus hooks. So why should I go catfishing in rivers? Well, they aren't only abundant there, they'll give you a very rewarding and challenging fight, and catfish are delicious deep fried for those who enjoy the entire catch and cook experience. Go get 'em, gang. Okay, folks, thanks for watching. Please like this video, hit the subscribe button before you leave, and don't forget to enable your bell notifications so you never miss another great video coming your way.